Why do we knock on forbidden doors? Let's begin by being brutally and beautifully honest, as all true beginnings should be. When we speak of magic, let's move aside all of the celestial glitter and the comforting incense smoke. At least for a moment. The popular imagination pictures the magician as a figure of arcane wisdom, draped in starlit robes and whispering to the cosmos. The reality for our purposes is far more direct, more industrial, and infinitely more potent. It is a path that is less saintly than it is Luciferian. Not a pact with evil, but a conscious choice to become the light bringer. To steal the fire of forbidden knowledge, no matter the cost. A costly tuition, I assure you. Magic, in its most authentic and operational sense, is less a prayer whispered to the heavens and more a command spoken to the engine room of reality. It is a technology, and you are here watching this because on some level you have grown tired of asking. You are ready to learn how to command. And like any technology, from the sharpened flint to the quantum computer, its primary purpose is the exertion of force to reshape the world to a desired pattern. No one has ever stated this principle with more chilling clarity than the man who defined the field for the modern era, Aleister Crowley. In his foundational work, Magic, Book 4, he chisels the definition that stands as our starting point and our lodestar. Magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. He speaks of will, but the great secret is that your will is not truly yours. It is a current you learn to swim in, one that was flowing long before you and will flow long after. A lawyer's precision, if you ask me. Notice the vocabulary. There is no mention of gods, spirits, or morality. There is science, implying a system of repeatable and testable principles. There is art, implying the skillful, intuitive application of those principles. And then there are the two granite pillars of the entire edifice, change and will. This sounds more like the language of an engineer rather than that of a mystic. The grimoire becomes less of a prayer book and more of a schematic. The ritual is less a supplication and more a sequence of psychological levers being pulled to activate a specific mechanism. This reframing of magic as a practical science has deep roots. It is the esoteric echo of the same Enlightenment impulse articulated by Francis Bacon, who argued that the true purpose of knowledge lies in its practical application. The idle contemplation of ancient philosophers doesn't cope well with our current realities. As Bacon stated in his Novum Organum, 1620, human knowledge and human power meet in one. For him, the goal of science was for the relief of man's estate and to give humanity dominion over nature, a phrase that has aged about as well as milk. The magician simply takes Bacon's dictum, scientia potentia est, knowledge is power, and applies it to consciousness. Yet the application of power is more than practical too. It is a profound, if unspoken, theological statement. Faced with the classic problem of evil or theodicy, concerning the question of why a good cosmos contains suffering, the magicians provide a Gnostic and heretical answer. They do not seek to justify the ways of God. They seek to usurp them, becoming their own agent of change in a world they deem imperfectly managed. A word of caution, my friend. When you set out to correct the management, you eventually have to answer to the owner. The central mechanism, the fuel for this entire engine, is the human will. The 19th century occultist Eliphas Levi, whose work was a direct precursor to Crowley's, wrote the following axiom in his La Clef des Grands Mystères, 1861. To affirm and will what ought to be is to create. To affirm and will what ought not to be is to destroy. A tidy binary equation for a universe that is anything but. What he omits, of course, is that in this art, every act of creation is also an act of destruction. To build your new road is to destroy a patch of ancient wilderness. You must learn to be at peace with this. Here the will is elevated to a cosmic, creative and destructive force as the magician's sole point of leverage on the universe. It is a cosmic reenactment of what the psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan called the mirror stage, which is the moment an infant first recognizes its own unified image. The magician looks into the mirror of the cosmos and sees a creator, and in that recognition, a new and powerful self is born. A universe that does not respond to pleading, but to a focused and unshakable intent. This is the moment you stop asking for permission from the universe and begin issuing its statements of purpose. It is a profound shift, and you must be ready for it. And what is this focused, unshakable intent, but the expression of life's most fundamental command? This idea brings us to a heavy philosophical parallel in the work of Friedrich Nietzsche. The magician's will is a direct expression of what Nietzsche called the will to power, a fundamental drive of all things to expand, to grow, to strive, to overcome, and to dominate their environment. A force entirely beyond good and evil. A force that simply is what it is and what it will be, the same way Yahweh tells Moses, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, I am that I am, or I will be what I will be. As Zarathustra proclaims in Nietzsche's magnum opus, thus spoke Zarathustra. Where I found the living, there I found the will to power, and even in the will of the one who serves, I found the will to be master. It stands in direct opposition to the entire moral universe of a philosopher like Immanuel Kant, whose categorical imperative demanded a universal law for all, whereas the magician's will is the ultimate assertion of the singular exception. And the universe, my friend, has a rather mixed opinion on exceptions. And who is the great archetype of the singular exception, this soul who wages everything against the universe? It is the scholar who, having exhausted all knowledge, turns to the forbidden arts. This philosophy is a formula for radical self-liberation, and potentially for catastrophic self-destruction. No one has ever dramatized this spiritual wager with more profound insight than Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. His masterpiece, Faust, opens with the scholar in his study, having reached the absolute limits of human knowledge, yet finding himself utterly unfulfilled. He has mastered every discipline only to be confronted with his own wretched ignorance. It is from this point of absolute intellectual despair that he makes the fateful turn, declaring, So myself to magic I've vowed to give, and see if through spirit's might and tongue the heart from some mysteries cannot be wrung, if I cannot escape from the bitter woe of babbling of things that I do not know, and get to the root of those secret powers which hold together this world of ours, the sources and centres of force explore, and chaffer and dabble in words no more. Pay close attention. The door to real magic is not labelled power or glory, it is labelled despair. It is the one door you find only when all other doors have vanished. The eternal cry of the overeducated and underrealized. We've all been there. Here, the entire magical quest is in a single desperate cry. It is a rejection of received knowledge in favour of direct, perilous experience. Faust wants to capture the essence of the world. Magic is the technology he turns to when all other technologies of the mind have failed him. It is the final, heroic, and perhaps foolish attempt to force a silent universe to reveal its secrets. And let me tell you a secret in return. The universe is not silent. It is simply waiting for you to learn its language. And here is your first, most difficult lesson. The universe does not deal in universals. It deals in consequences, your consequences. So let this be our brutal prelude to the psychology of magic. We are studying more than a collection of spells. We are studying a technology of the soul, a dangerous one, born from the Faustian despair of knowing everything and understanding nothing. It is a Luciferian path of the Lightbringer, a Gnostic rebellion against an imperfect cosmos, and a profound heresy against the universal moral laws of both God and men. Its single axiom is that focused consciousness can reshape reality. Its methods are scientific, its application is an art, and its fuel is the relentless, amoral, and magnificent power of the human will. This is the work I do here at Irevelato. I chart these dangerous currents. I am attempting to build an Aquarian library of Alexandria, a place for this kind of knowledge to bloom, a place where the secrets we deserve to know are revealed. To join in this great work, the simplest gesture is to subscribe. It is the first act, the laying of the first stone for the great hall we intend to build together. And with the foundation established, our work now turns inward, to the treacherous ground upon which all true structures must be built. You, the conscious, thinking, decision-making entity reading or listening to these words, believe yourself to be the master of your own house. This is a charming, useful, and entirely necessary delusion that allows us to operate normally day to day. It is also, from a magical and psychological perspective, profoundly untrue. The brutal truth is that your cherished ego, your sense of I, is a tiny cork bobbing on the surface of a truly fathomless ocean. Let me be clear. The person you believe yourself to be is only the public relations officer for a vast, unruly, and ancient corporation you call a soul. One of the most crucial maps for this exploration was charted by Carl Jung, who dedicated his life to revealing the contents and meanings of these depths. He saw the structure of the psyche in precisely these terms. As he outlines in one of his Zurich lectures from the 27th of April 1934, consciousness is a recent and fragile acquisition. Consciousness swims on the unconscious world like a round disc, or is like a small island in the ocean. Consciousness can never be identical with the soul. It is only a part, perhaps a very small part, of the soul. The soul is the whole. If you want the whole person, you must always wait for the unconscious to speak as well. A humbling truth that the ego tends to hear as a direct insult. But you are an islander. You may cultivate your little garden, build your huts, and declare yourself king, all while being utterly dependent on and at the mercy of the immense tide-pulling, storm-brewing ocean that surrounds you and indeed constitutes the vast majority of your world. Long before our modern maps of the psyche, the ancients drew this same territory in the language of myth. This is not a new or even a modern idea. It is the secret hiding in plain sight in the heart of Western philosophy. In his Republic, Plato gives us the allegory of the cave, which is the perfect metaphor for our predicament. We are prisoners, chained from birth, who can only see the shadows of puppets cast upon a wall, mistaking them for reality. The philosopher, and for our purposes the magician, is the one who begins the agonizing process of turning his head to see the fire, the puppets, and the puppeteers. A process that comes with a terribly sore neck, metaphorically and sometimes literally. And if you choose this path, you will learn that the chains are made from your most comfortable assumptions. Magic, then, is the attempt to see the strings. What are these strings? What are these oceanic currents? They are legion. First, there are the primal instinctual drives, which Sigmund Freud famously conceptualized in his analogy of the horse and rider. In The Ego and the Id, 1923, he writes, "The functional importance of the ego is manifested in the fact that normally control over the approaches to motility devolves upon it. Thus, in its relation to the ID, it is like a man on horseback, who has to hold in check the superior strength of the horse, with this difference that the rider seeks to do so with his own strength, while the ego uses borrowed forces. The illustration may be carried further. Often a rider, if he is not to be parted from his horse, is obliged to guide it where it wants to go. So in the same way, the ego constantly carries into action the wishes of the ID as if they were its own. You are the rider, pretending you are in command while sitting atop a beast of unimaginable power, which includes your biological inheritance, your repressed desires, and your deep-seated traumas, and which is, more often than not, heading where it pleases. The great pessimistic philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer saw this even more starkly, viewing the entire universe as the expression of a blind, striving, insatiable will, a force which he considered the inmost nature, the kernel of every particular thing. Your intellect, he argued, is just a servant to this blind and unconscious master. But this great blind will does not push upon us as a uniform force. It presses through ancient channeled patterns, like water cutting canyons through rock. Deeper still, beneath the personal traumas and instinctual drives, lie the great tectonic plates of the psyche, the archetypes. These are the ancient, inherited, universal patterns that structure human experience. They are the gods and demons of old, residing not on a literal Olympus, but in what Jung called the collective unconscious. Jung describes them as the psychic residua of numberless experiences of the same type, which manifest as the hero, the trickster, the great mother, or the wise old man. These are the master puppeteers and the great currents in the psychic ocean, the great shareholders in your inner corporation, and each one will demand its dividend. You do not use an archetype. That is the ego's greatest and most dangerous folly. You may, if you are skillful and honorable, be granted a brief and terrifying lease. Therefore, the magician's first step is one of profound humility. It is the admission that you are a puppet. Your thoughts are often not your own. Your desires are rarely original, and your sense of control is a carefully maintained illusion. Thus, the true work of magic is not about learning to command the ocean. That is an unrealistic fantasy of ego inflation that leads directly to drowning. The work is to become a master navigator. It is to learn to read the tides of instinct, to chart the currents of archetype, and to have the courage to look at the leviathans that swim in your inner sunless depths. One need only look to literature to see a perfect cautionary tale. Captain Ahab from Melville's Moby Dick. Here is a man of formidable will, a model of a conscious master, yet he is entirely possessed like a puppet, whose every action is pulled by the string of his obsession with the white whale. The white whale is a perfect symbol for a monstrous, all-consuming archetype risen from the depths. Ahab saw his string, and instead of understanding it, he let it pull him to his doom. Magic is the attempt to do otherwise. Captain Ahab mistook the size of his monster for the size of his destiny, a classic tragic error. Where the novice believes the goal is to cut the strings, the master understands the goal is to learn to play the marionette with grace. So I ask you directly, what is your white whale? You must have the courage to know its name before you dare to build a ship. And here is the strangest part of all. That vast ocean is, in its own way, terrified of your tiny island of consciousness, because you are the one who gives its monsters names. This, of course, is a vast subject. We have spent many hours in other corridors of our growing library exploring the minds of Jung and Plato, and the nature of the archetypes themselves. For those who wish to go deeper into these specific currents, I encourage you to explore the archives of this channel after our present work is done. For now, let us return to the very reason one seeks out such a library in the first place: the desperate cry for a map in the midst of a storm. Let's dispense with the pleasant fiction of the serene seeker and the spiritually well-adjusted individual who picks up a grimoire as one might pick up a new hobby. For a great many, the journey into magic begins with a desperate fall. It is a response to a life bereft of power, a last-ditch effort to seize the controls when the vehicle of one's life is careening towards a cliff. I have known many who came to this art. I have known none who came to it from a place of casual satisfaction. You are likely here for the same reasons. Science revealed this is a fundamental principle of human behavior. The great anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski, studying the Trobriand islanders in the early 20th century, noted a fascinating dichotomy. In their safe, predictable lagoon fishing, where their skills were sufficient, magic was absent. But when they ventured into the dangerous, unpredictable open sea, magic was everywhere. As he concluded in his seminal essay, Magic, Science and Religion, 1925, we find magic wherever the elements of chance and accident and the emotional play between hope and fear have a wide and extensive range. We do not find magic wherever the pursuit is certain, reliable and well under the control of rational methods. Magic, in short, grows in the gap between what we can do and what we need done. It is a technology of last resort. It is for the open sea, not the calm lagoon. The lagoon is where you learn the names of things. The open sea is where you learn that things have names for you. Now let us bring this insight from the outer world of the tribe to the inner world of the individual. What is the modern equivalent of the open sea? It is the experience of trauma, the chaos of poverty, the helplessness of disease, the slow grind of a soul-crushing job, or the profound victimhood of abuse. It is the feeling of being an object to which things happen, rather than a subject who makes things happen. This feeling of being a pawn in a game whose rules you cannot comprehend was given its most visceral voice by Fyodor Dostoevsky. His underground man is the patron saint of the powerless, a character raging against the stone wall of deterministic reality and of a world where 2 times 2 makes 4. He cries out that he would rather assert his own will, even to his detriment, than submit to a reality that negates his agency. It is this scream against the stone wall that often constitutes the first magical incantation, though rarely a very effective one, I'm afraid. Anger is fuel, not a vehicle. Screaming at the wall only leaves you with a sore throat. The art lies in finding the frequency that makes the wall itself dissolve. The hunger for agency is perhaps the most fundamental human spiritual need. In the abject horror of a Nazi concentration camp, the psychiatrist Viktor Frankl observed that the ultimate freedom, the one that could never be taken away, was the power to choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances. He writes in Man's Search for Meaning, 1946, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Magic is the radical and often audacious extension of this principle. It takes Frankl's internal choice and attempts to project it and to make it binding upon the external world. It is an existential rebellion. As the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre would argue, we are condemned to be free, and to flee from this freedom is to live in bad faith, to exist as a thing. The turn to magic is a violent refusal of this bad faith. It is the desperate assertion, "I am not a thing, I am a cause." And you must be prepared to be held accountable for your effects. The universe is a meticulous and unforgiving bookkeeper. But such a bold assertion requires proof. It demands a method. It is one thing to declare your agency, it is another entirely to make it effective. This is why modern magic, particularly since the late 20th century, is so direct. It returns to the spirit of the earliest alchemists, who were practical workshop philosophers, testing their theories daily in the fire of the crucible before they were mystics. The guiding principle is no longer tradition or piety, but raw efficacy. The central question shifts from, "Is this ritual correct?" to "Does this ritual work?" This will become your most important question. The cosmos has little interest in your theories, but I promise you, it pays very close attention to your results. Eventually, if you persist, you will ask a much harder question. Not does it work, but what does it work upon me? This mirrors the American philosophical tradition of pragmatism, where an idea's truth is measured by what William James called its cash value in experiential terms. If a ritual produces a tangible psychological or material result, it is, for all practical purposes, true enough. The modern magician, like the pragmatist, is less concerned with the absolute truth of a metaphysical system and more with its functional power to effect change. This pragmatic philosophy manifests as a kind of hacker ethic applied to consciousness. The magician seeks to understand a system, be it the psyche or reality itself, in order to find its exploits, its backdoors, and its command lines, often dispensing with the user manual of traditional dogma. Magic is a toolkit for direct intervention, an elegant and effective way to reprogram your reality in accordance with your will, which is often the language of a psychological engineer rather than a priest. The high priest, you see, is concerned with piety. The engineer simply wants to know if the bridge will hold. Both are valid paths, but only one gets you to the other side. It is a promise of a repertoire, a promise of tools for the tool-less. It is a system that says to the person drowning in the open sea that perhaps, just perhaps, they can learn to command the tides. Magic for many is the moment when the primal scream against the universe is disciplined, focused, and transformed into a word of power. Your conscious mind, the diligent accountant of your waking life, speaks the language of prose. It loves spreadsheets, clear definitions, and linear arguments. It is sensible, respectable, and frankly, a bit of a bore. But beneath the accountant's tidy office lies the engine room of your being, the unconscious. And the unconscious is a mad, passionate, drunken poet who speaks only in the language of symbols. And your true work, as an artist of the soul, is to become a sober, discerning editor of that poetry. Magic is the art of learning the poet's grammar, but it is also the art of knowing when the poet must be silent. Not every symbol needs to be spoken, not every power needs to be called. Wisdom is measured as much by your restraint as by your reach. Your rational mind may scoff at a pentagram, a hexagram, or the serpentine sigil of a Goetic spirit. It sees only lines, superstition, perhaps even a hint of madness. But your unconscious leans in. It is captivated. Why? Because, as Carl Jung tirelessly argued, our rational intellect is only one form of thought. He distinguished it from a far older and more profound mode of cognition, writing in the structure and dynamics of the psyche. Do we ever understand what we think? We only understand that kind of thinking which is a mere equation from which nothing comes out but what we have put in. That is the working of the intellect. But besides that, there is a thinking in primordial images, in symbols which are older than the historical man, which are inborn in him from the earliest times, and, eternally living, outlasting all generations, still make up the groundwork of the human psyche. It is only possible to live the fullest life when we are in harmony with these symbols. Wisdom is a return to them. A stop sign is a sign. It points to a known command. A crucifix, a Star of David, or the Ouroboros serpent eating its own tail is a symbol. It does not point, it reverberates, it makes your flesh tremble. It is a psychic tuning fork that vibrates with a complex of ideas, emotions, and primordial memories that can never be fully articulated in prose. And one must be very careful what one chooses to vibe with. The philosopher of aesthetics, Susanne Langer, in her masterful Philosophy in a New Key, 1942, called this power unconsummated symbolism. The meaning is never fully used up or exhausted. This is the secret of the Grimoire's seductive power. It bypasses the skeptical accountant and delivers its message directly to the poet. The labyrinthine diagrams, the strange names, the Baroque imagery, they are designed to be incomprehensible to the ego. Their strangeness is what makes them effective. They are a form of cognitive dissonance that cracks the shell of ordinary consciousness. As the chaos magician Austin Osman Spare developed in his highly influential system, a sigil works precisely because the conscious mind forgets its meaning, allowing the symbol to sink, unobstructed, into the fertile soil of the unconscious, where it can germinate. This process is nothing short of intoxicating. To the individual feeling lost in a meaningless, chaotic world, yelling at the stone wall of Dostoevsky's underground man, the grimoire offers a sudden, shocking revelation. The universe is a living poem, and you've just been given the key to its interpretation. Every object can be a tool. Every direction can be a power. Every celestial body can be an intelligence. This is the enchantment of the world that the sociologist Max Weber claimed we had lost to rationalization. But magic promises its glorious return. This is an addiction, but not to a substance. It is an addiction to meaning. It is the same hook that draws people into grand conspiracy theories or fundamentalist religions. In a world of bewildering complexity, these systems provide, as Joseph Campbell described the function of myth, a way to put the mind in accord with the body and the way of life in accord with the way of nature. The grimoire is a personal mythology, a user's guide to one's own sleeping soul, a word of advice from someone who has read many such manuals. Never mistake the book for the library. So the seeker, feeling powerless and unheard, opens the book. The accountant in their head scoffs at the strange drawings. But the poet within, who has been starving in the cellar for years, recognizes the language of his homeland and weeps with joy. It is a homecoming, and this feeling of being finally truly seen by the cosmos is a seduction so profound it is almost impossible to resist. We have only touched upon the surface of this language here. In the archives of this library, we have dedicated entire explorations to some of the most potent symbols, as seen in our popular videos Esoteric Eyes and Serpens Mercurialis. For those who wish to understand the grammar of these images on a deeper level, I encourage you to open those doors after our present work is done. The power of a symbol lies in its interpretation, and the life of an idea lies in its discussion. Your own thoughts and insights add another layer of meaning to this work. The dialogue we have in the comments below is its own kind of living grimoire, and I invite you to add your voice to its pages. And this living dialogue is but the most recent chapter in a story that is as old as human anxiety itself. Let us discard the romantic fantasy of a Prisca Theologia, which is that single thread of pristine wisdom passed down in an unbroken golden chain from Hermes Trismegistus to the present day. It is a beautiful story, and like all the best stories, it serves to comfort rather than reveal truly something effectively useful. The golden chain is a comforting lie. The truth is a series of crude, scorched ladders, hastily built in the dark by men and women fleeing a fire. A more honest history of magic is a history of anxiety, filled with sequences of desperate measures, with each new magical system arising as an elaborate coping mechanism for a new and more refined form of terror. A history of what keeps us up at night, and the increasingly clever ways we've invented to turn on a light. You must understand this. Every grimoire is a scar. It is the beautiful and savage pattern left behind by a profound collective injury. This is how human consciousness evolved, and the ever-present shadow of alienation that it casts. The fear of God starts to make more sense now. The philosopher Owen Barfield, in his book Saving the Appearances, charted this course, describing the shift from an ancient, original participation where humanity felt no separation from the world of phenomena to our modern condition of radical separation. Magic can be seen as a series of desperate and heroic attempts to heal this ever-widening wound. Stage 1 is the terror of the animate world and the shamanic response to it. Our journey begins in the flickering firelight of prehistory, in a world that was terrifyingly alive. For early humans, the rustle of every leaf, the shadow of every cloud, and the glint of every eye in the darkness could be a spirit, a god, or a hungry predator. This kind of terror is absolutely unpredictable. The desperate measure developed to cope with this was shamanism. The shaman was the first psychological technician. As the historian of religion Mircea Eliade exhaustively documented in his classic Shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy, 1951, the shaman is a specialist in mediating with the spirit world, a great master of ecstasy, who can journey into the supernatural realms to appease, to bargain with, and to fight the unseen forces that govern life and death. The shaman seeks to stop the blizzards, to heal the sick, and to find the lost game. It is once again a pragmatic magic of survival. Then stage 2 brings the terror of organized society and its theurgic response. With the rise of agriculture and cities, the anxieties evolved. The terror was no longer just the wild forest, but the new organized chaos of civilization. Sometimes crops fail, maybe a plague outbreaks, and other times the whim of a king determines the outcome of a war. The old spirits were now organized into vast cosmic bureaucracies we call pantheons. The desperate measure became theurgy and temple-based religion. Magic became a system of cosmic negotiation. Ancient religion was often a matter of practical, contractual relationships with the gods. You performed the correct sacrifice, spoke the correct prayer, and the god of the harvest or war was compelled to act. This is the magic of the citizen, desperately trying to find a foothold in a world of overwhelming social and natural forces. Stage 3 is the terror of the clockwork cosmos and the Renaissance response. The Renaissance shattered the cozy, hierarchical cosmos of the Middle Ages. The new sciences of Copernicus and Galileo revealed a universe that was vast, mechanical, and terrifyingly indifferent. The old gods seemed to retreat. This gave rise to a new and dreadful anxiety, the terror of individual insignificance. If man is not the center of God's creation, then what is he? The desperate measure was the birth of the Renaissance mage. Figures like Marsilio Ficino, Paracelsus, and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola forged a new magic for a new humanity. Theirs was a system designed to empower the individual, to elevate the magician from a humble petitioner to a divine operator. Pico's oration on the dignity of man, 1486, is the thunderous manifesto of this era, in which God says to Adam, "We have made thee neither of heaven nor of earth, neither mortal nor immortal, so that with freedom of choice and with honor, as though the maker and moulder of thyself, thou mayest fashion thyself in whatever shape thou shalt prefer." A beautiful, terrifying permission slip to become either a masterpiece or a monster. This is the magic of becoming a god to cope with the terror of a godless cosmos. Finally, stage 4 is the most familiar, the terror of meaninglessness and the modern response, the long shadow of the Industrial Revolution and Nietzsche's proclamation of the death of God. The terror is no longer spirits or kings or cosmic indifference, but absolute meaninglessness and psychological alienation. The desperate measure is modern occultism. From the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn to Aleister Crowley's Thelema, magic becomes almost entirely a psychological enterprise. Its goal is the integration of the fragmented self and the creation of personal meaning in a universe that offers none. Crowley's famous dictum from the Book of the Law, "Every man and every woman is a star," is the ultimate coping mechanism for the terror of modern anonymity. A beautiful sentiment, but it is vital to approach this sentiment with eyes wide open. A star, after all, is a continuous, violent explosion, and from our perspective on Earth, the light from most of them is just the beautiful echo of something already long dead. So by all means, become your own self-contained universe, but do so with balance, and live your life while your light is truly your own. Each stage, then, is a brilliant, desperate, and increasingly dangerous solution to the problem of being a fragile consciousness trapped in a terrifying world. And 2025 terrors are in another class of their own, and we are all anxiously curious how everything will turn out in the end. But remember, the history of magic is the history of our finest psychological armor, because it is forged in the fires of our deepest fears. Let us be unsparingly direct. To practice magic is to indulge in the most profound and necessary form of narcissism. A physicist may look at the stars and feel a sense of humbling insignificance. A mystic may look at them and feel a desire to dissolve into their silent and cosmic majesty. But the magician looks at the same stars and thinks, "I can make use of that," which, depending on the magician, is either the beginning of wisdom or the punchline to a very long, very cosmic joke. This is the foundational axiom, the secret handshake of the art. The universe is not only aware of you, but it is intensely, intimately, and operationally responsive to the content of your individual consciousness. To hold this belief requires a degree of self-importance that is, from any conventional standpoint, staggering. It is a willed and weaponized return to a psychological state that Sigmund Freud identified as a key feature of both infantile development and so-called primitive thought. He called it the omnipotence of thoughts. In Totem and Taboo, 1913, Freud describes this as the conviction that one can alter external reality simply by thinking about it. For the infant in the cradle, the wish for food magically produces the mother's breast. The infant does not distinguish between its own internal state and the external world. The magician's first task is to rebuild this infantile kingdom, but as a conscious act of will. The entire philosophical architecture of Western magic is designed to provide a sophisticated justification for this breathtaking egotism. The cornerstone is the famous Hermetic axiom from the Emerald Tablet, "As above, so below." This is the ultimate permission slip for magical narcissism. It declares that the human being, the microcosm, is a perfect, miniature reflection of the entire universe, the macrocosm. Therefore, to know oneself is to know the cosmos, and more importantly, to act upon oneself is to act upon the cosmos. This axiom is the magician's key and his cage. Once you truly accept it, you lose the alibi of blaming the world for your own inner state. It is total freedom and total responsibility. Most people cannot bear it. This is the myth of Narcissus writ large upon the heavens. The ancient Greek youth fell in love with his own reflection in a pool of water. The magician falls in love with his own reflection, but sees it mirrored in the face of God, in the orbits of the planets, and in the substance of reality. The universe becomes a grand cosmic scrying mirror, and in it, the magician sees only the echo of their own will. The previously mentioned oration on the dignity of man by Pico della Mirandola is the jubilant cry of this discovery. The moment Narcissus realizes his beautiful reflection possesses the power to shape itself. No one embodied this cultivated grandiosity more fully than Aleister Crowley. His entire system of Thelema is built upon it. While his concept of discovering one's true will can be read as a humble submission to purpose, its practical application often manifests as the ultimate narcissistic equation. My deepest desire is the law of the universe. He defined the great work, the supreme goal of the magician, as nothing less than the raising of the whole man to the power of infinity. There is no humility in such a statement. It is an expression of boundless Promethean ambition. Please do not confuse this state with self-esteem. It is more of a methodological solipsism. A practitioner must operate as if nothing exists but their own consciousness and its limitless power. They must cultivate a conviction so absolute that it can withstand the silence of an indifferent cosmos and the skepticism of a rational society. This narcissism is, therefore, the magician's most essential tool and their most terrible vulnerability. It is the psychic fuel that allows them to stand within the circle and command the spirits of the deep, believing utterly in their authority to do so. But it is also the flaw that, unchecked, leads directly to the madness of ego inflation, to a complete divorce from consensual reality, and to the lonely, sterile fate of the original Narcissus. A soul so enamored with its reflection that it starves to death, unable to connect with anything outside of itself. It is the fire that forges the magical sword, and the same fire that can melt it into a useless slag. In our modern world, there are unseen forces that govern what is seen and what remains hidden. The algorithm that powers this platform is one such force, a blind and mechanical golem sometimes. Your approval, the simple act of liking this video, is a surprisingly potent command. A gesture of will that feeds the fire and directs this blind entity to show this work to others who may be seeking it. Let me put it to you this way. Your ego is the boat, not the ocean. It is a necessary vessel, but you will make a terrible error if you believe it is the destination. Always think about that. But influencing the outer world is a crude art compared to the precise engineering required for the inner ascent. If the path of the priest is one of faith and surrender, then what follows is the magnum opus of the magical engineer. If the magician's core belief is a functional narcissism, then his foundational textbook is Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, De Occulta Philosophia Libri 3, circa 1533, which is a full-throated manifesto for deification by degrees. It presents the most seductive promise in all of Western esotericism, a ladder, a systematic path of ascent by which the individual soul can climb from the mud of the material world to the very mind of God. Agrippa, with scholastic precision, divides his great work into a cosmic bootstrap operation in 3 parts. The first is elemental magic, which works with the terrestrial world of herbs, stones, and the base elements. Elemental magic is the first rung, learning the hidden virtues of the world beneath our feet. The second is celestial magic. It is the magic that ascends to the mathematical and astrological dimensions of the planets and stars, learning to draw down their specific influences or virtues to reorder one's life and environment. Last, but not least, we get ceremonial or divine magic. The final, terrifying leap. This is the work of communing with the highest powers, including angels, intelligences, and ultimately, God himself. Not as a humble servant, but as a knowing cooperator. The sheer audacity of this program is breathtaking. Agrippa promises that we may ascend by the same degrees through each world to the very original world itself, the maker of all things and first cause, from whence all things are and proceed. The goal is to become a divine conduit, a master of all levels of reality. One can contrast this hierarchical ladder model, rooted in the classical great chain of being, with the more postmodern magical model of the rhizome, proposed by philosophers Deleuze and Guattari. The rhizome has no center and can connect any point to any other point, representing the non-hierarchical approach of the chaos magician, for whom any symbol can be linked to any desire in a web of pure will. One is a corporate ladder, the other is the internet. Both can get you where you want to go, and both can get you hopelessly lost. Choose your map wisely. As nothing comes out of nothing, this grand vision has a source. It is the magical application of Neoplatonic philosophy, which is fundamentally a philosophy of ascent. The great mystic Plotinus, in the 3rd century AD, described the ultimate spiritual goal as the flight of the alone to the alone, a rapturous return of the individual soul to its divine source. The Renaissance Magi, like Marsilio Ficino, took this mystical ideal and turned it into a practical, if perilous, project. They sought to use talismans, music, and planetary alignments to align their own souls with the anima mundi, the world soul, and begin the climb back to divinity. Yet for every promise of divine ascent, there is an accompanying shadow, a myth of tragic overreach. Herein lies the brutal question and the pivot upon which the magician's soul will either soar or shatter. Is this a genuine path to enlightenment, or is it the ultimate fantasy of the ego? Is the magician truly transcending their self, or are they just inflating it to cosmic proportions? The cautionary tale is perfectly captured in the Greek myth of Icarus. Gifted with wings of feather and wax by his father, the master craftsman Daedalus, Icarus begins his ascent. He's ecstatic, powerful, godlike, but he is seduced by the flight itself. Forgetting his father's warning, he flies too close to the sun. The hubris and the heat of his own ambition melt the wax of his ego's contraption, and he plunges into the sea. A cautionary tale about the difference between flying and simply falling with style. The lesson here is for you, and it is simple. The sun is a source of light, not an ingredient for your wings. Never confuse the two. The novice reads this and fears the sun. The master understands that the true enemy was the seductive beauty of the wings themselves. Carl Jung gave this condition a clinical name, ego inflation. It is the state in which the conscious ego has identified with a powerful archetype, most often the self or the God image. The ego does not feel humbled by the divine, it feels it is the divine. In his masterwork, Ion, Jung warns us, it must be reckoned a psychic catastrophe when the ego is assimilated by the self. The ego has flown into the sun, and its world has become nothing but a blinding solipsistic light. Agrippa's promise is the promise of Daedalus. Here are the wings, and here is the way to the heavens. It is a true testament to human potential, but it is always shadowed by the fate of Icarus and Faust. The path of ascent offered by ceremonial magic is the ultimate high-wire act, performed without a net over the abyss of madness. Every step up the ladder increases the ecstatic view and the deadliness of the fall. It is the fantasy that one can touch the sun without getting burned. The ultimate gamble of the soul that refuses to accept any limitation, even its own. But here lies the secret that Agrippa himself could only hint at. His ladder stands in your own spine. The elemental world is your body, the celestial world is your mind, and the divine world is the silence from which both emerge. You are the ladder. There is nowhere else to climb. Naturally, we have only sketched the outline of a vast system here. For the sole members and Patreon of this channel, for those who form the inner circle of this school, we have explored the higher rungs of this ascent in exclusive essays like the 33rd degree. This is the path for those who do not just wish to see the map, but to truly understand the territory. Understanding the territory is one thing. The vehicle you must build to traverse it is another matter entirely. Let us dispense with the notion that a grimoire is a simple cookbook of spells. It is not. It is a theatrical script for a psychological drama of the most intense and dangerous kind. It is a meticulously structured manual for inducing a controlled crisis, a willed and navigated psychotic break. Let us call it what it is, a training manual for controlled deconstruction. You are learning how to take the engine of your own psyche apart while it is still running. It requires an exceptionally steady hand, or, to put it more politely, a strategic reboot of the entire system with the factory settings turned off. The entire purpose of its Baroque rituals, its barbarous names, and its bizarre diagrams is to provide a container, a form, a structure for the terrifyingly formless influx of the unconscious. It offers a structure for your madness, a way to channel it instead of being destroyed by it. Think of it this way. Your psyche is a nuclear reactor. You already possess the power. The grimoire doesn't create it. It provides the cooling rods and the containment shield. It is a technology of safety for a journey that is anything but safe. It is, in effect, the original technical manual for that engine room of reality we spoke of, a schematic of the soul, written by its most daring engineers. This process is what the anthropologist Victor Turner, in his foundational work The Ritual Process, 1969, called a liminal state. The magician in the circle is in a state of being betwixt and between the worlds, which is no longer fully in the mundane, not yet fully in the divine. It is a condition of supreme vulnerability and potentiality. Turner noted that such states are often seen as dangerous and polluting. The Grimoire, then, is the script that structures this perilous transition. It provides the stage, the props, and the lines for a performance that would otherwise dissolve into chaos. This idea of a necessary transformative crisis is a central key to shamanic initiation across the globe. The man destined to be a shaman does not choose his path. He is chosen by it. And this choosing often takes the form of a violent, unsolicited, initiatory sickness. As Mircea Eliade wrote, the shaman begins his true life by a separation, that is, as we shall presently see, by a spiritual crisis that is not lacking in tragic greatness and in beauty. This spiritual crisis is what an outside observer would label a psychotic episode. But what is most important is that the Grimoire is the collected wisdom of those who have survived the terror. It is a clinical manual that says, when you start hearing the voices, here are their names. When you start seeing the visions, here are their sigils. When the terror comes, here is the circle that will contain it. Carl Jung developed a therapeutic corollary to this process called active imagination. He understood that the only way to deal with the autonomous, powerful figures of the unconscious was to engage with them consciously. Instead of being a passive victim of visions, psychosis, one must become an active agent in the dialogue. Jung described this as giving the unconscious a chance to produce a new situation, creating a synthesis between the conscious and unconscious. A ritual evocation from a grimoire like the Ars Goetia is precisely this, albeit in its most dramatic and high-stakes form. It is a forced, scheduled appointment with an inner tormentor, but one for which you have the script. The radical psychiatrist R.D. Laing went so far as to suggest that some forms of what we call madness are not a sickness but a natural healing process. In The Politics of Experience, 1967, he wrote, "Madness need not be all breakdown. It may also be a breakthrough. It is potentially liberation and renewal, as well as enslavement and existential death." The grimoire is the wager placed entirely on breakthrough over breakdown. It provides the ship and the map for Laing's perilous inner voyage of madness. It is a manifesto declaring that this corner of the psyche, which the consensus world has labeled pathological, is in fact a source of unimaginable power, if it can be properly colonized and its energies properly channeled. Ultimately, the grimoire is a script for what the playwright Antonin Artaud envisioned in his Theatre of Cruelty. The kind of theatre that dispenses with entertainment to become a life-altering ritual. It is a performance with an audience of one, designed to shatter the personality and reveal the raw archetypal forces beneath. It is a desperate, brilliant and terrifying strategy to court madness on your own terms, in the hope of emerging from the affair as its master and not its slave. We have spoken of grimoires as manuals of deconstruction. For our soul members, we have gone further, analyzing the psychology of one of the most complex and enigmatic figures in sacred history, in our exclusive essay on King David called The Holy Warlord. It is an exploration for those prepared to face the darkest paradoxes of power and divinity. If these words have brought even a glimmer of light to your own darkness, perhaps the most potent and immediate magical act you can perform is to share that light. Sending this work to another soul who is navigating their own beautiful madness is how the true, unbroken chain of wisdom is forged. And the primary tool in the forge where such chains are made, the hammer that shapes the very substance of reality, is belief itself. In the quiet halls of conventional religion and spirituality, belief is treated as a virtue, a light, a soft pillow, or a gentle hand to hold in the dark. It is a state of passive and hopeful acceptance. This is a lovely and often useful notion. The magician, however, finds it quaintly and dangerously naive. To the magician, belief is a hammer, a lever to be pulled, a tool, a technology, a weapon to be consciously and ruthlessly cultivated, aimed and fired at reality. This instrumental view of belief was given its most eloquent philosophical defense, not by a wizard in a tower, but by the eminently respectable father of American psychology, William James. In his 1896 essay, The Will to Believe, James argues that in situations where evidence is absent, belief itself can become a crucial component in creating a positive outcome. He also presents in another essay, Is Life Worth Living?, the famous analogy of a mountain climber facing a leap they can only make if they have total confidence. Suppose, for instance, that you are climbing a mountain and have worked yourself into a position from which the only escape is by a terrible leap. Have faith that you can successfully make it, and your feet are nerved to its accomplishment. But mistrust yourself and think of all the sweet things you have heard the scientists say of maybes, and you will hesitate so long that at last, all unstrung and trembling, and launching yourself in a moment of despair, you roll in the abyss. In this case, as James puts it, faith in a fact can help create the fact. The magician takes this single situational insight and expands it into a universal law of physics. They are the mountain climber, and the chasm is reality itself. If this sounds like wishful thinking, one need only look to the rigorously documented world of modern medicine to see this principle at work. It is called the placebo effect. It is the demonstrable, repeatable, and utterly mysterious fact that a patient's firm belief in an inert substance, such as a sugar pill or a saline injection, can produce real physiological changes. As described in countless studies, belief can alleviate pain, reduce inflammation, and alter brain chemistry. The placebo effect is the uncomfortable scientific proof that the architecture of your own body is strangely, powerfully obedient to the stories you tell it. The true placebo, my friend, is the tacit belief that you are merely a powerless observer of your own life. It is the most common and most potent inert substance on the planet. Let that sink in. I mean it. Pause and consider the profound and terrifying responsibility of that fact. What stories are you telling your body right now? This principle scales up. The sociologist W.I. Thomas, in 1928, formulated what has become a foundational axiom of the social sciences, which has been coined as the Thomas theorem. If men define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. A rumor of a bank's insolvency, though false, becomes true in its consequences when it causes a bank run. Social reality is a consensus hallucination built on shared belief. The magician simply opts out of the consensus and attempts to build a more interesting hallucination for an audience of one. Nowhere is this weaponization of belief more explicit than in the school of chaos magic, which emerged in the late 20th century. Chaos magicians treat belief as a fluid, programmable tool, utterly divorced from faith or truth. As Peter J. Carroll, a key architect of the movement, explains in Liber Null and Psychonaut, 1987, the magician must be able to adopt and discard belief systems at will, like a craftsman selecting the right tool for a job. A belief in ancient Egyptian gods might be adopted for a wealth spell, and a belief in alien entities for an act of divination. Carroll writes, magical training is designed to open up the neglected dream level, to provoke an examination of the contents of the robotic level, and to add new programs to it. It should also teach the method of turning awareness on or off at will, and of entering the Gnostic level and acting within it. The mechanism of this weaponized belief is perfectly illustrated in Austin Osman Spare's system of sigils. The magician distills a desire into a symbol, charges it with the intense emotion and belief of a climactic moment, Gnosis, and then actively represses it from the conscious mind. This act is like loading a bullet, the desire, with a gunpowder charge, the belief, and firing it into the vast, dark expanse of the unconscious, from where it can warp the web of probabilities without the interference of the skeptical ego. The uncomfortable truth is this: The magician understands that reality is porous, negotiable, and strangely submissive. Belief is not a comforting feeling about the world, but the force one exerts upon it. It is the focused pressure that bends the iron bars of circumstance, and the magician is the one who has resolved to spend their life in the forge, sharpening that force into a blade. In an age of endless distraction, to consciously direct one's attention is a superpower. That small notification bell next to the subscription is a simple charm of intent, a way to ensure you are present when the next lesson begins, and that your focus is not fractured by the chaos of the digital world. For it is only with such unbroken focus that one can approach the final aim of all this work, the ecstatic and terrifying state of Gnosis. Let us now speak of the unspeakable, the supreme aim of the practical magician, the ecstatic moment for which all the circles, robes and incantations are a prelude, is the attainment of Gnosis. This is a state of non-dual consciousness, a temporary dissolution of the ego, where the subject-object barrier collapses and the magician directly experiences themselves as one with the universe. It is a moment of pure, unmediated participation in reality. It is also, to a trained clinical observer, functionally indistinguishable from the onset of an acute psychotic episode. Consider the diagnostic criteria for psychosis or schizophrenia. The patient may experience a breakdown of ego boundaries, a feeling that their self is dissolving, auditory and visual hallucinations, such as seeing and conversing with entities that are not there, delusional systems of thought where their mind can affect the outside world, or that they have a special cosmic destiny, and sometimes the conviction that random events hold a profound and secret personal meaning. Now consider the professed goals of the ceremonial magician: to systematically dissolve the ego and achieve union with the Godhead, to see and converse with angels, demons, and spirits, to operate under the axiom of as above, so below, believing their mind can affect the outside world and that they have a special cosmic destiny, also known as the Great Work, and to perceive the universe as a web of living symbols and synchronicities, where every event holds a potential meaning. The overlap is total. The destination is, from the outside, the same. The difference lies entirely in the journey. The quote that perfectly encapsulates this terrifying proximity is often attributed to both Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, who likely paraphrased the radical psychiatrist R.D. Laing: "The mystic swims in the same waters in which the schizophrenic drowns." The difference for you will come down to one thing: training. The swimmer has practiced. The drowner has fallen from a boat. Do not, I implore you, fall from the boat. This is the razor's edge. The difference between the initiate and the patient is in the act of swimming, not in the nature of the water. Let's dissect this crucial distinction. First, it's about volition and control. The magician walks to the cliff edge and chooses to dive. The psychotic individual is pushed from behind. The magician, armed with their will, seeks to master the visions. The patient is mastered by them. Aleister Crowley understood this razor's edge better than anyone. He insisted that the magician must approach their work not with blind faith, but with a radical, pragmatic skepticism. He did not ask his students to believe in the objective reality of the spirits or gods they contacted, but only in the repeatable results of the experiments. In the introduction to his masterwork, he lays down this core principle of scientific illuminism. In this book it is spoken of the Sephiroth and the paths, of spirits and conjurations, of gods, spheres, planes and many other things which may or may not exist. It is immaterial whether they exist or not. By doing certain things, certain results follow. Students are most earnestly warned against attributing objective reality or philosophic validity to any of them. This is the language of a man who knows the bookkeeper only cares about the final balance sheet. This is the ultimate firewall against madness. The magician is not required to believe the vision is real, only that the technique that produced it is reliable. It is the mindset of a physicist in a laboratory of the soul, focused entirely on the experimental data, not on the ultimate nature of the phantoms that appear in the test tube. Second, it's about structure and tradition. As we discussed, the Grimoire is a script. It provides the names, symbols, and narrative framework, the ship and the map for the journey. Carl Jung, who walked this edge his entire life, understood this perfectly. His own confrontation with the unconscious, documented in the Red Book, was a self-induced shamanic crisis, but one which he navigated by meticulously documenting, painting, and analyzing his visions. He was not their passive victim, but their active and often terrified interlocutor, who crucified himself and became a magician in his imagination. Third, we must talk about the return ticket. The modern magician understands that their sanity depends on the ability to return to the shared consensus world. The goal is not to live permanently in the ecstatic state of Gnosis, but to visit it, bring back its treasures, and ground oneself again in the mundane. This conscious shifting of perspective is perfectly encapsulated by the writer Robert Anton Wilson's concept of reality tunnels. Wilson argued that every person experiences the world through a subjective filter of beliefs and assumptions. These are their reality tunnels. He also proposed that the brain consists of two parts: the thinker, which can think of anything, and the prover, which automatically sets about to prove whatever the thinker has thought. The prover is a loyal, uncritical servant. This is the mechanism that creates and maintains our subjective reality tunnels. The magician, then, is not someone who has found the one true reality, but someone who has learned to consciously direct their thinker. As Wilson states directly in Prometheus Rising, what the thinker thinks, the prover proves. The ability to consciously select one's reality tunnel and, crucially, to be able to return to the default, paying the bills and cleaning the toilet tunnel, and the ability to master one's own thinker and thus control what the prover builds as reality, become the ultimate form of reality management. The tragedy of the schizophrenic is not the strangeness of their reality tunnel, but the fact that they are trapped in it. The tragedy of the schizophrenic is that their thinker is out of control, and their prover is dutifully building a terrifying and inescapable reality. The magician, in contrast, cultivates the skill of being a tourist, never a permanent resident of any single vision of the world. He aims to become a master programmer, consciously choosing the thoughts that will become the architecture of their world, and always keeping the keys to the default program. This is the central drama of the mystic throughout history. Centuries before anyone spoke of reality tunnels, they spoke of discerning spirits. Saint Teresa of Avila, the 16th century Spanish mystic, wrote in her autobiography of her ecstatic raptures, including levitation, loss of sensory control, and divine voices, with such intensity that she herself was plagued by the fear that they were the work of the devil, not God. Her confessors and the Inquisition were equally concerned that their origin was pathological. The line between the saint and the madwoman has always been a matter of theological and political interpretation. Thus, the magician is an explorer of consciousness, who voluntarily travels to a land from which others are unwillingly exiled. The only thing that separates the psychonaut from the patient is the iron discipline of the will, the anchor of ritual, and a valid return ticket. To walk this path is to live upon that razor's edge, knowing that one step to the left is enlightenment, and one step to the right is the abyss. And eventually, you learn the most painful and liberating truth of all. There is no return. Every journey into that water changes the swimmer. You do not come back. You simply learn to live as a different person in the old world. This confrontation between the ego and the self, between man and God, is perhaps the central theme of the entire spiritual quest. It is a subject we explored in great depth in one of our most viewed essays, The Unconscious God Who Tormented Job to Gnosis. For those of you wrestling with this very paradox, that exploration may offer an additional map. This path, as you can see, is not without its perils and its paradoxes. It can feel like a lonely wire walk. That is why, on Patreon, I have established a private community where we can discuss these matters directly. It is a place to test ideas, ask the difficult questions, and find fellowship among other serious travelers on the way. But even with such fellowship, the final journey is one that must be taken alone. And it is there, in the solitude of the inner world, that the most subtle siren sings. Let us call the magician by their modern name, the Psychonaut, the sailor of the soul. Having learned to navigate the treacherous waters of the unconscious, they discover that the inner world possesses a siren's song. It is more vivid, more colourful, more intensely meaningful, and certainly more flattering to the ego than the drab bureaucratic landscape of consensual reality. Herein lies the primary and perhaps ultimate addiction of the art, his slow, sweet, ruinous preference for the inner landscape over the outer world. Magic, in this sense, is the original virtual reality, and it is infinitely more immersive than any technology we have yet devised. The drug is not a chemical, but a state of being, where one is the hero, the creator, and the center of a living, breathing mythology. The French poet Charles Baudelaire, a connoisseur of such states, perfectly described the allure and the peril in his study of intoxicants, Les Paradis Artificiels, Artificial Paradises, 1860. Of the hashish eater, he writes that for a while he thinks he is a god. However, the central problem is to know if he will even retain the strength and moral courage to get back down to earth. In Baudelaire's words, soon this pride subsides, the tempest settles into a relaxed calm, and he sees the universality of all creatures coloured by a sulphurous dawn. The magicians face the same problem, having achieved their paradise through the formidable force of their own will. Why would a man who can converse with angels in his temple want to listen to his boss in the boardroom? Why would a woman who can scry the future in a dark mirror care about the 5-day weather forecast? This is a danger of which Carl Jung was acutely, personally aware. He knew that the unconscious, once opened, could be all-consuming. His advice to those overwhelmed by the power of the inner world was famously, beautifully mundane. He would tell them to focus on their cooking, to chop the vegetables with precision, to feel the grain of the wood under their hands. He understood that sanity is maintained by a conscious, diligent connection to the humble earth. As he noted, the experience of the self is always a defeat for the ego, and an ego in a state of perpetual defeat is of no use to anyone. What use, after all, is a public relations officer who has been forced to admit that the official story was never true? The mechanism of this addiction is clear. Every successful ritual, and every startling synchronicity, and every terrifyingly beautiful vision delivers a powerful neurochemical reward. It is a surge of dopamine, the thrill of meaning, the satisfaction of perceived power. And this creates a classic behavioral addiction loop. The psychonaut returns to the inner world for another hit of significance, while the outer world, with its responsibilities, its relationships, its dishes waiting in the sink, begins to seem grey, faded, and utterly unimportant. This is a tale as old as myth. In Homer's Odyssey, the hero's men come to the land of the lotus eaters. Those who eat the honey-sweet fruit fall into a blissful stupor, losing all desire to continue their journey or return to their homes. They are not in pain, they are in a state of perfect, placid contentment. And those who ate of the honey-sweet fruit of the lotus had no longer any wish to bring back word or to return, but there they were, fain to abide among the lotus eaters, feeding on the lotus and forgetful of their homeward way. The Grimoire is a lotus. The inner world is a lotus. It offers a forgetfulness of the often painful homeward way of mundane life, but this is also the final test of the psychonaut. Having escaped the cave of Plato's consensus reality and seen the blinding sun of the archetypal world, they must now force themselves to go back down into the darkness. Plato himself notes how maladapted this returning philosopher would be. His eyes were unaccustomed to the gloom, and his words were nonsensical to the other prisoners. The ultimate addiction, then, is not to one's own soul. The great trial is not entering the temple, but being able to leave it and walk, with grace and utility, in the marketplace. For many a promising psychonaut, the journey ends here, not with a bang or a fall into madness, but with a slow, quiet fade into blissful irrelevance, forever lost in the beautiful, sterile landscapes of their own mind. And so we return to our first question. Why do we knock on forbidden doors? Perhaps it is not only to steal fire or command the tides, but to face the ultimate choice, to become a god in a world of our own making. A full-time job with endless overtime, I might add. or to learn to chop vegetables with the grace of a master and find the whole of the universe in our own two hands. To command the storm from the lonely peak of a mountain of your own making, or to learn the art of building a fire that can warm a village. Both are acts of powerful magic. Both have their price. You must decide which loneliness you can bear. The great work of building this library is a collective ritual. Every subscription is a stone laid in the foundation. Every like is a candle lit in the darkness. Every comment is a voice in the choir. Every share is an act of luminescence. And every patron is a fellow architect, without whom the work cannot continue. The architecture of the library is a collective task. But the door you choose to enter through is a choice you must make in the solitude of your own heart. The choice, as always, is yours. So tell me, which door are you knocking on?